password combination, and it'll receive here and it'll read it in such a way that it's going to have another object called work email, and it'll have its own variable email and password, which will have its own values, whatever it might be. Hence, you can create multiple objects of the class mail and you can use them. This is what I just wanted to show initially with the logic or concept of object-oriented programming. I hope this so far makes sense. If there's any query so far within this, please feel free to let me know. If there are no queries, we can move ahead. All right. So yeah, moving ahead. Assuming this makes sense so far, let's go on to the next part of it. Now, let's see if this works as expected. I'm going to create another email. Let's call it as work email. And I'm just going to write work email dot setup. And I'm just going to write, let's say, work at email.com. And the password will be some random characters. Let me just run this. I'm not sure why these are still messy in this terms. Let me just run and see if there is any error within this. First, let's switch to our environment. Now let's go to the directory. Let's run this file. Okay, it's executing as expected. It's just that this is not picked up for some reason. That's fine, but it's executing as expected. That's our important thing. For our reference, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to print, or rather than print, let's just use IC to make it faster and save time. I'm going to print personal email.email. I'm going to print personal email dot password. I'm going to do the same again, but this time it's going to be for work email. There we go. We get to see that personal email is an object that has different values, and work email is another object that has different values for itself. That's how we get to work around it. So please take a look at this. If there are any queries that you have so far, please let me know. If there are no queries, we can just move ahead. All right. So no queries so far. That's perfect. Let's go ahead. Now, here's the first thing we need to know here. Let me just try closing and opening this file. I'm not sure why. Okay, there it is. It got picked up now. Perfect. I think it was just some issue earlier. All right, this is awesome. Right. Now, instead of creating an object and then calling a setup function separately, we can make sure that you can send these values the moment you create an object itself. I'll just place it here. I'll remove the setup function. Same way, I'm just going to place it here and I'll remove the setup function. At this point of time, if you want to create an object in this order, if you want to create an object in such a way that the moment the object is created, these variables are sent. there is a specific function name that we should use, that is double underscore. Now remember, all inbuilt functions, all common inbuilt functions that we use in Python start and end with double underscore. We're going to have double underscore init double underscore as a function. Now, this particular function is called a constructor. A constructor is a function within a class that executes the moment you create an object. The purpose of a constructor is to set up an object with all the things that the object requires. It could be memory, it could be some variables, it could be some values, it could be anything, or it could be some token generation, whatever it could be. The whole idea of a constructor is, in short, in simple, just to make sure that the moment you create an object like personal email or work email and send some information, it's going to take that information and it's going to perform some operations for you. A better example to always provide why we need constructor, or rather anything that you learn in object-oriented programming, the best example to understand why something is useful is always to look at the scenario of a bank account. Think about bank accounts as a class, bank account as a class, and your bank account is an object of the class. If your bank account is an object of the class, the moment you create an object, that is the moment you create your own bank account, the first thing you get is an SMS or an email and some welcome kit and a debit or credit card. All these things will be done and set up. These can be a part of a constructor when you create a bank account with some information. It's going to take that information, it's going to create an initial bank account with some balance that you provide. If you provide otherwise zero, it's going to perform some operations like send you some SMS, create a random unique bank account number for you, create a debit card number for you, set it up, all these sort of things. These can be the things you can put it within a constructor, just for example. And these constructors are by default executed when the object is created. It's not compulsory for us to give parameters within constructor. You can keep a constructor completely as empty, no parameters at all. Even if it's empty, you still have to read self because the object is going to call it. So remember, even if you're not sending any parameter to any function of a class, you still have to read self within it. That's a compulsory thing that you just need to know. Now, with this idea, let's move ahead and let's see how it works out. So when you run this, you get the following details. So yeah, please take a look at this. If you have any queries, please let me know. Right, so no queries so far. So this seems to be good enough for us to understand and work through. Right, so that means we can move ahead over to the next case. Right, let's go ahead. Now, we have created an object to begin with. We are able to send some information to that object. We are also able to obtain individual specific information for that object. Now, here's the thing. One thing that we need to know about classes and objects. When you have a function, let's say we create another function called send mail. When you have a function called send mail, the whole idea of send mail function is that whenever this is performed, whenever this operation, basic operation is performed, what happens is send mail is a common function. It's a common code. This code is not repeated for any object. This code is just a common code. Any object that wants to run this function called send just sends whatever parameter they have. It goes to this function, it executes. The code, functional code, will be common always. It's just that apart from functional code being common, you just need to know that these functions will be executed by these objects. So the next step of ours is to create a function called send email. Let's do that up next. Right. Now, in order to send email, let's import a couple of other libraries. We're going to import SMTP library and SSL, two specific libraries that we are going to use. You can use comma and import one more thing, or you can just use import SSL separately. That's completely up to us. It's just a thought process. This can be used in any way whatsoever. Now, let's start with this. If you want to perform email sending operation using SMTP SSL, again, I'll just point this out, there are multiple ways to send um, emails. Just for our reference, there are multiple um, ways to send emails. We can send email either using, let's say, SMTP SSL, or we can also use something else that is available called in SMTP called TTLs. So let me just give you the difference between both of these so that we understand what is the difference and we understand how it works. So the first thing you need to know is encryption. Since we are sending mails, again, please note there are two things we are learning simultaneously within this little application. We're learning how to create a simple class, and we are also learning how to send emails. Now, first thing, when we start to learn sending emails, one of the first and most important thing we need to know is about encryption, specifically TLS encryption. This is something that we need to know. Now, remember, whenever you perform email sharing, sending operation, whenever you send an email, you're basically going to use TLS or transport layer security. And you need to ensure that whatever you're sending is encrypted over transport layer. Hence, we use transport layer security by default. Now, to create transport layer security by default, we just have to, whenever we connect with, let's say, an email, we just have to perform a simple function called start a secure connection. That is start a TLS, transport layer security connection. That's all we need to do. And that's exactly what we're going to do at our end, which I will share ahead. Now, let's begin with this. Now, first thing you need to know here in send email is that you'll have your email, you'll have your password, you have these. The next thing is you just have to send an email, a message. In my case, I'm only going to send a text message, an email that consists of some text information. I'm not going to worry about adding some additional complicated data such as attachments and everything. We're just going to learn something fairly simple so that we can understand how objects and classes work. Our main purpose is to learn object-oriented programming within this, right? So first, common thing. Assuming your email is Gmail, it has its own SMTP server and port. So I'm just going to show this as well. List of SMTP servers and ports. Yeah, I think this probably is a good link to learn. Oh yeah, and Mailtrap is pretty good. Mailtrap provides its own email sending API. It has its own emails if you want to give a check on it. It and since this is paid, they have some good documentation with their code as well. So yeah, through SendGrid. I'm not sure where exactly you need to go to take a look at the code of this. Let me just check this out. Yeah, email API. Sorry, not email API. SMTP service. They have not specified it here, but yeah. Anyway, if you want to get into this, yeah, there you go. Here's where I wanted to go. API. Yeah. So Mailtrap, if you really want to take a look into it, they have some really good APIs to send email by their own email operators. Think about it. From your email, you cannot send thousands and 10 thousands of mails, right? With my email, I can use for my own purpose, send 1 or 2 mails to myself or to others each day. But if you want to send 1,000 or 10,000 emails, it's not going to happen through an API. The server will flag you and it'll block your email for these operations. Instead, professional mail service providers like SendGrid and Mailtrap allow you to do this so that if you have your own web application or if you have your own application, like for example, every time you log into some application, they're going to send a verification code or a one-time password to your email. And there can be 10,000 such users who will log into their application each day. In that case, you can use something like Mailtrap or SendGrid to ensure that it will help send these OTP-based emails, and you can verify it over your application. That's one way we can do it. And since we are learning this, we can even learn add that logic and learn that as well for reference. But anyway, let's get back to the basic idea of sending email. Let's not go too forward in this. Now, here's what I want to point out: SMTP ports. There are a lot of SMTP ports available. There are some standard ports that we use. Each, let's say, service provider uses a particular SMTP port. Uh, Generally, we use port 465 and 587. These are what we use on a general basis. Again, each one has its own purpose, each one has its own usage. If anybody wants to take a detailed look into it, you can check this out. Again, this is not completely related to Python, but it's something that's quite good to learn from networking side if you want to get to know about us. It's quite beautiful to learn this. Right, so this is the port we're going to use, 587. It's because it's the default port and it's available, and it also, as we talked about earlier, helps with TLS or transport layer security as well. This transport layer security is not available in previous ones, in previous ports. So that is what we have here. So let's go ahead and try this out to see if this works out. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And they say to test if a port 587 works on your server, run the following command, and so on. So we're not going to do all of this. Let's not worry about all of this. So just remember the basic stuff for us. That is, we're going to use port 587 in order to make sure that we have transport layer security and then send an email. That's all we need to know. Right. Now, followed by this, let's go on to the next thing, that is SMTP servers, not ports. I think we don't have it here. Let me find a separate link, list of SMTP servers. Again, I'm just using a few different links so that we can take a look at this and learn this simultaneously by avoiding going through a lot of it. So that when I share these links later to you, you can get to know more about it. Right, there we go. Think, yeah, these two links should be fairly good enough for us to learn. Perfect. Now, whenever you want to send emails, you have multiple protocols available. IMAP, POP, and SMTP. A lot of different protocols or approaches are there. The one that we are going to use is SMTP particularly, because that's fairly um, advanced and it's available. It's really good for us to work around things. So yeah, as I specified earlier, Gmail lets you send up to 500 emails per day. So if you create a simple application, this should be fine. But if you want to go ahead to something more complicated, you need things. Now let's get to this. This is what I want to point out. Whenever you create your email service, you need to know what port you're going to use. You need to know what SMTP address you're going to use. You need to know your email. You need to know your password. You need to know these basic things that will help. And these are what we're going to use in order to send an email, right? So we don't need name at all. That's optional. We just need username, password. We don't need SSL. We can just use TLS for our reference. Again, I'm going to differentiate between them so that we get to understand this better as well. Right. So let's go ahead in this case and try it out. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's assume to avoid multiple confusions. Let's assume that we are only going to use Gmail services, which is why I will keep common set of information like, let's say, SMTP. What are the things that we might need? Server equals smtp.gmail.com. This is the SMTP server that we'll use, the default SMTP server of Gmail. Then SMTP port that we'll use will be the default one, that is 587. So these are a few things that we will set up in prior so that we use these throughout. That is the whole idea. That is the whole uh, purpose of performing this. Now, let's move ahead from here to the next part of this. The next thing, if you want to log into an SMTP server, what you also need is some objects and some um, different kind of, mm, let's say, functionalities to be added. So we'll add that. But prior to that, I apologize in advance, but I might need to go on mute for maybe a minute. So please bear with it. It most likely won't be longer than a minute. And I don't prefer to um, ruin or disrupt the session in usual, but please wait for just a minute. Right, hey everyone, and apologies for the slight delay, so please bear with that. Right, moving back to this, let's continue ahead very quickly. Now, first thing I'll do is to make sure that this whole program does not seem complicated and it seems as simple as possible. There are a few things that I'll just import in prior so that we know what to expect from it. We have a few things inbuilt called MIME types for our reference. Again, I know that there are a lot of things that we are suddenly looking at. That is fine. But once we add it to the code, it's going to become easier and simpler to understand. For example, SMTP server is of Gmail. SMTP port is the port that we use. This will tell us that whatever email we provide has to be a Gmail based email. And the port we're going to use will be the SMTP port that Gmail supports. With these known, the next thing we need to do is just start transport layer security with it. In order to start transport layer security with it, we need to create our own server object for this. So that's another thing that we need to do. So let's do that as well. So a few things that we need to do, a few steps that we need to do. I will walk through the entire steps in prior so that it does not get complicated for us. So please don't worry about it. Right. So the first thing we need to do is SMTP library dot um, SMTP. This should be the one. Yes, this is the one. So here we need to specify what is the host server and what is the port. The host server is this SMTP server, and the port we're going to use is this. And this server connection that we're going to create, I will store it in a variable called server connection. That's it. So the server connection is going to be an object of SMTP library's SMTP class. For that class SMTP, we're going to send two information, the server and the port. Once done, it should create this server connection. Once we have this server connection created, we should also start a transport layer security for it. So for this server connection, before you perform send and all other operation, we start a transport layer connection, a transport layer security, and that's it. These are the basic steps that we need to do in prior. That's it. I hope this makes sense. Now remember, I'm gonna have to have a separate connection for each object. I'll specify here. This will be different for each object. Since it will be different for each object, I'm gonna add self to it. And for those who are a little confused, here's what this means. If I create an object called email1, and if I create an object called email2, email1 will have its own set of variables. Those will be self. Everything that begins with self is a part of the object. It's unique for each object. So email1 will have email, password, and SMTP server and SMTP port. So SMTP server and SMTP port and server connection as well. So this will be separate for E1. The same will be available for E2 as well, but the value of each will be different because these are variables which are unique for each object. That's the first thing we need to know. And why we are doing all of this is because this server connection object that we have, that is the one that logs into your email in order to send email. So the moment we create an object, when you send your username and password, what it does is it creates SMTP connection to the server and port. And please note, I'm not sending username and password yet or email and password yet. First thing I'm doing is set up TLS. That is encrypted connection. This is the first thing we do. After we do this, then we will log in with username and password. To log in with username and password, just use self.server connection. And I believe we have, yeah, login. There we go.